In the summer of 1980, a small, unassuming town in upstate New York became the site of one of the most audacious heists in American history. On a warm evening in June, a group of armed men broke into the headquarters of the Lufthansa airline at JFK International Airport, stealing over $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewelry. The daring robbery stunned the nation and set off a massive manhunt for the perpetrators. It wasn't long before law enforcement officials began to suspect the involvement of the Italian mob, and specifically a powerful mafia family known as the Lucchese crime family. Over the course of several years, investigators painstakingly pieced together the evidence, until finally, in 1985, several key players in the heist were brought to justice. But the Lufthansa heist was just one small chapter in the long and bloody history of the Italian mob in America. For over a century, the Italian mob has been a shadowy presence in American life, a powerful criminal enterprise that has influenced everything from politics to labor unions to the entertainment industry. From the streets of New York City to the boardrooms of corporate America, the Italian mob has left its mark on the country in ways that are both fascinating and terrifying. In this video series, we take a deep dive into the hidden world of the Italian mob, exploring its history, its culture, and its impact on American society. We uncover the secrets of the mob's power and influence, from its early days as a loose network of street gangs to its evolution into a sophisticated criminal organization with a far-reaching network of connections. The origins of the Italian mob in America can be traced back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when a wave of Italian immigrants began arriving on American shores. These newcomers faced a difficult and often hostile environment, struggling to find work and assimilate into a society that viewed them with suspicion and disdain. To survive in this new world, many Italian immigrants turned to the only resources they had: their own tight-knit communities and traditions. In these close-knit neighborhoods, known as Little Italies, Italian immigrants formed strong bonds of loyalty and mutual support, helping one another find work, housing, and protection from the often violent gangs and criminals that plagued the streets of urban America. But in these communities, there also existed a darker side, as certain individuals and groups began to engage in criminal activities to make ends meet. These early criminal enterprises were small and unsophisticated, consisting mainly of petty theft and extortion. Over time, however, these small-time criminals began to organize themselves into larger and more powerful groups, taking on increasingly complex and lucrative criminal enterprises. By the early 20th century, these groups had coalesced into a loose network of criminal organizations that would come to be known as the Italian mob. At first, the Italian mob focused mainly on bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution, but as their power grew, they began to expand into other areas, such as drug trafficking, labor racketeering, and political corruption. Through a combination of violence, intimidation, and bribery, the Italian mob came to control vast swaths of the American criminal underworld, wielding enormous power and influence over both the legitimate and illegitimate sectors of American society. Despite the efforts of law enforcement officials to crack down on the mob, the Italian mafia remains a powerful and influential force in American life to this day, a legacy of the immigrant communities that first gave rise to its power and influence. In the early years of the 20th century, the Italian mob was still a loose collection of criminal gangs, operating mainly in the immigrant neighborhoods of America's major cities. But as their power and influence grew, so too did their ambition, and soon the Italian mob began to organize itself into a more cohesive and centralized criminal organization, the American Mafia. The American Mafia, also known as La Cosa Nostra, was formed in the late 1920s when the various Italian criminal organizations in the United States came together to form a national syndicate. Under the leadership of a group of powerful bosses, or dons, the American Mafia quickly became one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. At the heart of the American Mafia's power was its ability to generate enormous sums of money through a variety of criminal enterprises. One of the most profitable of these enterprises was bootlegging, the illegal production and sale of alcohol during Prohibition. With the sale of alcohol prohibited by law, the American Mafia saw an opportunity to make vast sums of money by supplying a product that was in high demand but short supply. The American Mafia became skilled at smuggling alcohol into the United States from overseas and then distributing it through a complex network of producers, distributors, and retailers. By the end of Prohibition, the American Mafia controlled a vast share of the illegal alcohol market, generating billions of dollars in profits. But bootlegging was just the beginning of the American Mafia's financial empire. Over the years, the American Mafia branched out into other areas of criminal activity, such as gambling, drug trafficking, and extortion. One of the most profitable of these enterprises was gambling. In the 1930s and 1940s, the American Mafia began to take over illegal gambling operations throughout the country. They set up their own casinos and bookmaking operations, but they also extorted money from legitimate casinos and bookmakers who paid protection money to the American Mafia in exchange for their undelivered services. Through their control of the labor unions, the American Mafia was also able to exert enormous influence over entire industries, from construction to transportation to the entertainment industry. They would demand a percentage of the profits from these industries in exchange for not disrupting the businesses with labor strikes or violence. Despite the risks involved, many legitimate businesses were willing to pay protection money to the American Mafia in exchange for their so-called services. In some cases, these businesses were even owned and operated by members of the American Mafia who used their wealth and power to expand their criminal empire even further. By the mid-20th century, the American Mafia had become a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise with operations stretching from coast to coast. They were involved in a wide range of criminal activities, including loan sharking, money laundering, and contract killing. But with great power came great risk, and soon the American Mafia would find itself under siege from law enforcement officials who were determined to bring down the mob once and for all. The American Mafia's hold on American society would be challenged in the decades to come, but their legacy would remain a powerful force in American culture and history. As the American Mafia continued to grow in power and influence, a number of individual mobsters became household names thanks to their larger-than-life personalities and their notorious criminal activities. These men and a few women became some of the wealthiest people in America, with fortune that were often built on the back of their criminal enterprises. One of the most famous of these mobsters was Al Capone, the notorious boss of the Chicago outfit. Capone was one of the most powerful men in America during the 1920s and 1930s, and he built a vast criminal empire through his control of bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. By some estimates, Capone's net worth was as high as $1.3 billion in today's dollars. Another famous mobster was Lucky Luciano, the boss of the New York Mafia. Luciano was known as the father of modern organized crime, and he was responsible for transforming the American Mafia into a more sophisticated and profitable criminal enterprise. Luciano was involved in a wide range of criminal activities, including bootlegging, gambling, and drug trafficking. By the time of his death in 1962, Luciano was estimated to have a net worth of around $100 million. Meyer Lansky was another famous mobster who made a fortune through his criminal activities. Lansky was a key figure in the national syndicate that controlled organized crime in America during the mid-20th century. He was involved in a wide range of criminal activities, including bootlegging, gambling, and drug trafficking. Lansky was also a mastermind of money laundering, and he was believed to have amassed a fortune worth as much as $600 million by the time of his death in 1983. Other famous mobsters who amassed great wealth through their criminal enterprises include Carlo Gambino, the boss of the Gambino crime family in New York, who was believed to have a net worth of around $400 million at the time of his death in 1976. John Gotti, the flamboyant boss of the Gambino crime family in the 1980s and early 1990s, was estimated to have a net worth of around $100 million before his arrest and imprisonment. Despite their enormous wealth, these famous mobsters were also the targets of intense law enforcement scrutiny. Many of them were eventually arrested and imprisoned, and their criminal empires were dismantled by law enforcement officials. Nevertheless, their legacies continue to fascinate and intrigue people to this day, and their stories have become a part of American folklore. And that's it for the video. In part 2 of this video series, we will take a look on how the mob heavily influenced politics, used the labor unions to gain even more power, and we will also discover how the mob is related to Hollywood, the entertainment industry, and even famous actors. So if you don't want to miss part 2, please subscribe to my channel. Bye.